Hey, 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 good morning. Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert, and friends all over the world. It's Tuesday. You know what that means. I get to hang out with that
One of the
guy
directors. Here we
right
are.
there. Jeffon Seely. It is chapter 16 of How to Be an Anti-Racist. As we keep going through the book, we've got this chapter. We've got 3 more weeks, including today. As we keep going through the book, 18, that's been 18 really good, or 16. It will be really good weeks of the material that we've been pouring through, 2 more. And if you're still hanging with us after 15 weeks, a blessing upon your house. We're grateful to have you here.
Yes.
My name's Charles Hall. That's Jeffon Seely. Everything's lovely. I get to join you today from the Pacific Northwest. I came up here. We're having some family time and a little bit of a working vacation. So grateful that we have this technology. So that's just like I'm back home in Palm Desert. Like nothing's changed. How are you today, my brother? What's going on?
Things are going good. All of a sudden the weather started changing, and I never realized how cold actually 60 degrees feels. When I lived in North Dakota, you know, when it's after those -10 days and weeks, you get 20 degrees or 30 degrees, and it's like, wow, this is so warm. But
T-shirt weather.
yeah, the body acclimates to the climate, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I noticed the other night, my daughter and I were out taking a walk, and it was probably 85 degrees out, but a little breezy. And my daughter says, "Dad, I'm cold." I said, "Really?" So our blood's definitely getting thinner from living down in the desert. I'm grateful for it. So as we keep moving through here, my friend, we've got a chapter on failure. Chapter 16 called Failure. Another fascinating chapter. Just behind the scenes real quick. I would say it's like clockwork that when Jeffon and I get on do our little pregame when we get on, he says, we just talk about it a little bit, and he says, this was a great chapter. I said, I think I've heard that before. Have you said that? He said, I think I've said it 15 other times. So here we go. We're doing it. So as usual, Jeffon's going to take the lead. I know he's got material prepared for us. Unless there's anything else you want to say, my brother, let's dive into it, shall we?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is just, as always, to acknowledge everybody who has been a part of this or is a part of this, even chiming in today, maybe for the first time. As always, if you have insights or things that anybody would like to share or discuss, this is an opportunity for us to kind of bring our ideas together and go forward from that. And then honestly, just remembering that everything is based from a center of love and compassion. And we're having this discussion not so we can say this is right or this is wrong, but more so that we can recognize our shared humanity with one another and stand upon those principles that we talk about week in and week out at CSL communities across the world. And that is the idea of divine order, the idea of oneness, the idea of an infinite intelligence that is guiding us each second of each day. And this book is just an opportunity for us to venture inward and embrace this level of introspection, to recognize the areas that we may not be aligning in that at all times throughout the day. So it's just an opportunity for growth and development, which I just kind of want to share.
Absolutely. And as Jeffon mentioned, we want you to dive in and comment and question and share your insights with us as well to help make this program even more robust. And that's interesting, Jeffon, is you bring up right and wrong. I've noticed with each chapter as we go through each week that as I'm confronted, oftentimes I go to, that was, my behavior was wrong, or my behavior was right. When I feel confronted by the author, when he says, or how I interpret something that he's saying, white people this, black people that, as a Caucasian man, as a white man, whenever he refers to, but white race, white people created this or whatever, it's like, when I feel confronted, I go into right and wrong. And I think that's a really beautiful point, that we're called to examine our behavior, notice where we can pivot and make a new choice that's more life-giving, what I'll say, instead of right or wrong, more life-giving. And then just grow and move on rather than, heap any shame upon it. That's a great point. And it's a discipline too for us too, as we move through life, to move out of right versus wrong and into a principle-based life.
Yeah, and this is something that I'll share before we jump in. I don't know if anybody else saw, but there was another, it happens often, so much so that often when we see it occur, we see it, we recognize it, and then kind of just move on. But I know that in Philadelphia yesterday, there was another shooting that happened. A gentleman had a knife, and I think he was shot 12 or 13 times maybe by the police, African-American man. And then I saw today in the protests, a car drove through a police barricade, and I know a truck hit 2 officers. And, just sharing that to say that I think from my perspective, there is a lot that we as humans can work on in this physical realm. The polarity, the confrontation that we feel when somebody says something that is outside of what we believe to be true, when somebody stands behind a leader or a politician or business that somebody doesn't agree with. And even when we talk about these things like a shooting that happened yesterday of an armed man with a knife, but nevertheless, I don't know if that justifies 13 shots or 12 shots. But nevertheless, I think that this is what we're really trying to get at the heart when we have these conversations, and more so where we can recognize what we can do right where we are, not where we can grab this magic wand and wave it, though we can have affirmative prayers and see the divine goodness flowing throughout all things. But what can we begin doing right where we are? And I think that that's kind of what this chapter really begins to lean into, is how have those things that we've stood up for in the past maybe not unfolded in the way that we might have hoped and led to this idea that he calls or says as failure.
And it's interesting. He really, maybe for the first time, I felt called to task in this chapter. He's like, you're not an activist unless you affect policy change. You're not, just having a demonstration.
Right.
And I'm sure you're going to get into this because we do a mind meld without even knowing it.
Right.
The author was calling us to task in the way that he does. Like, if you actually want to make a difference, you have to affect policy change. We have to change the ink, as we've talked about before. And that's let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah,
let's
definitely. All right, so I will share my screen here, and you could see that, correct?
Yep.
All right, so imagine this. We usually start off with definitions. This was the shortest one of the bunch, I think.
Yep.
Activist, one who has a record of power or policy change, kind of in alignment with what Rev Charles just mentioned. Now, you can see I still have my teasing effect where I'm not showing you the whole slide at once. So that means you have to lean in. All right, so this
on
chapter.
The edge of my seat.
Great to know. Leaning from Washington State. Thank you.
That's right.
So this chapter really began to bring to the forefront this idea of why racism lives and is to understand the history. And what he's ultimately understand the history of anti-racist failure. There we go.
Yep.
He's talking about a variety of things, really beginning to recognize not just, as Rev Charles said, demonstrations or marches, but how can we begin to shift the power structures that exist. And on the bottom of page 201, he touches upon a handful of things such as incorrect conceptions of race as a social construct as opposed to a power construct. And he kind of just brings these different ways that we've approached it, which may have led towards that failure of what we are aiming to achieve. On page 202, he talks about civilizing programs as well as behavioral enrichment programs and why those have failed in the past, as well as challenging the conjoined twins separately, which is racism and capitalism. We had a chapter that was touched upon that, as well as gentrifying integration. So these are various things that individuals and groups throughout history have really tried to address, but in doing so, it didn't necessarily reach the mass appeal or the mass shift that they aimed for it to achieve, due to the fact that they may have been going at it in a way that is not really addressing power and policy. Instead, it's simply programs that may be very well intentioned in nature, but just didn't ultimately go over the mountaintop, so to say.
Yep.
And that's on page 202. And I'll stop there for a second. I kind of bounced around there, but I'm really trying to just simply address the idea of policy and power structures. If we can organize in a way to begin to dramatically shift those, it seems that that would then lead towards a change of result.
Yeah. And what he talks about and what we talk about is from a principle-based living standpoint, from a new thought standpoint. And this is a line I quote from the middle of page 202 as well. Healing symptoms instead of changing policies is bound to fail in healing society. And that's what we talk about with ourselves as well, which is right in the, if we try and heal the symptom, we're not healing the cause. That what we need to do is look at the cause and actually be disciplined enough, courageous enough to actually keep digging in and diving in to examine the cause and not just the symptom. Because we know that in spiritual healing as well, that in healing our own lives, in healing my life, that if I'm just dealing with the symptoms can show back up. You know, if I'm just taking an Advil to cure a headache, or to heal a headache, whatever might be causing that, a lack of water, whatever it might be, that's gonna it's gonna keep happening until I address what's really going on. So, and I think that kind of summarizes, in my estimation, Jeffon, what he's talking about here. We can't just heal symptoms. We've got to look at cause and what's happening.
And that brings a point that I really didn't think of till you mentioned that is, at times it seems as if we are protesting an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And in protesting an effect, it's not always the easiest to back into that causation or the seed that effect blossomed from. And really beginning the process of how can we shift the cause that is creating the effects that we see.
Yeah.
Which is such an important point in our lives, in our communities, in the world at large. I think that's an important point that definitely is sprinkled all throughout Science of Mind.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. So we're looking at this. What I feel the author is charging us to do is charging me to do is actually look at even it just in my own life. I know he goes back hundreds of years as far as history and things like that. But in my life, in my history, in my 45 years, what are the causes in my life?
Mm-hmm.
And to actually re-examine those. And that's where the work lies.
Right.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, moving along, 15 minutes in, 13 minutes in. So I'll keep moving along. I wanted to start off with this particular point and this is on page 203, and then I'll kind of share why. I felt the burden my whole Black life to be perfect before both white people and Black people, and the Black people judging whether I am representing the race well. Never was his authentic self. And I don't know why this isn't playing this whole thing. Oh, there we go. So ultimately what he was saying is generations of Black bodies have been raised by the judges of uplift suasion to ultimately begin to impact people in a way morally or the way that they see things. And he's ultimately bringing us to this realization in this page 203, burden the Black body to always act in an upstanding manner to persuade away white racism.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I started with that paragraph there is because I feel in my life there have been times where I've unconsciously felt as if I was representing a large group of people, and the way that I displayed myself to people who may be of a different background than me impacted the way that they thought about the biracial or African American community. And in that way of acting, you are never necessarily your authentic self. You're always kind of leaning one side or another, instead of actually being your perfect self. I had it. There was something there when he said, the judges never let me be myself, my imperfect self. And I've not necessarily been able to align with this idea of imperfection, because from my understanding, though we are not necessarily, everything aligns in the physical realm at all times exactly as we want it to be, at a deep fundamental level within all human beings, there is this level of perfection and wholeness. Am I kind of, does that make sense what I'm?
Well, I think we can be burdened by the idea translating spiritual perfection into the human expression is impossible. We do our best at it through our spiritual practice and things like that, but the idea of spiritual perfection and everything being in order, we just talked about this a little bit too. You actually talked about it a little bit offline, that there is a fundamental order to things, but the idea of and that's spiritual perfection. That's a fundamental order. But to bring it into our human experience and our human expression, the imperfection, I think what it's not letting us off the hook, but there's an allowance of being, an allowance of making it up as we go, doing the best that we can, if we're really doing the best that we can. And I think that's what I think my experience, that's what he was talking about, is to be imperfect is to understand that we're still a human being.
Yeah.
And making it up as we go. We're trying to figure it out. You know, like, am I a perfect father? I would never walk around saying I'm the perfect dad, because I know I'm not. Mm-hmm. I am an imperfect father attempting to raise a daughter who is a contribution, has manners, has integrity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But to find perfection in the imperfection,
right?
You know, which again doesn't allow me to be irresponsible, but it takes us off the hook of trying to, you know, like the whole, like Jesus syndrome, the Jesus Christ syndrome, what I call it, of, you know, trying to live like Jesus. This idea of Jesus being, you know, the perfect expression of God, you know, made manifest here on earth. It's an impossibility. So we have to embrace our imperfection. I'm going on, but that's where I land with that, Jeffon.
Yeah. And with that one point, feeling the burden to live in a perfect way for the approval of others, and also so people will look at you and say, oh, he represents his community. Right. Or is that something that you've experienced, or anybody listening, have you experienced that?
That's a great question for everybody. Please weigh in. I haven't experienced as far as race. I've experienced color, skin color. I've experienced it as far as being a minister, though, and how I'm supposed to show up as a minister. That's a burden. That's a burden I've lived with now for 25 years. It's challenging, and I think educators face that sometime. You know, I think, you know, they're the judges, and I'm a judge as well. You're a judge as well. Like we're all the judges, projecting onto each other. But so that's what I've experienced it as a minister.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
But and also as a minister, my life isn't on the line though. And when we talk about skin color, people's lives are on the line. So I'm also aware of that. Yeah. My reputation might be on the line. Respect for my colleagues might be on the line, but not my physical life. And that's a whole other realm of understanding.
Yeah. I appreciate that. There is a point on page 204 that we're going to touch on 204, 205, but he's talking about his girlfriend at the time. I don't know if she became his wife as well, but they were eating at a restaurant, and a group of people were drunk, and one of the guys got up and started messing with the Buddha statue that they had. And this was a white man, and they looked at them embarrassed and said, you know, what's happening? And there was a point that said, harmless white fun is black lawlessness. And he kind of touches upon the Gen 6 here at the end of the chapter.
Yep.
And it really made me think the way in which, and this is a maybe policy or collective consciousness, places some people automatically as a criminal and others off the hook. For instance, in the police shooting that just happened last night in Philadelphia, there is another video of a different officer who was confronting a young white man, maybe in his 20s, who had a knife in his hand, was running from police. The officer had his taser out, and he walked up to the young guy and basically said, look, you can't run anymore. He basically caught him, but they were still separated. You can't run anymore. You're gonna walk back with me to the car, and then we'll get this all sorted out, okay? And so he went over and went to grab the kid, and he pulled out a knife and stabbed the officer in the neck. Didn't kill him, but stabbed him in the neck, and then started running. And the officer pulled out a taser and tased him. Now, on the flip side, and I know that these are not the same officers, it's not the same place, but this African-American man was had a knife and was walking towards police, but probably about 15 yards away. And two officers had their guns drawn and shot him 12 plus times. And that is this idea, and obviously harmless, that wasn't harmless white fun. He tried to stab the officer, but I'm just bringing this for a larger context of seeing the ways in which people are treated differently.
Yep.
And so anyways, I kind of rambled on, but that's something that I wanted to.
That's point taken and understood. Yeah. Yep.
So in this concept that him and his girlfriend at the time were having, they touched upon that uplift suasion. And they believe that good black behavior made white people less racist when our experiences told us that it did not. So just because somebody who represented the black race or thought that they did acted in a way that was kind and moral and just, that did not lead to transforming the consciousness of another person, so to say, at least based upon their experience. On the bottom of page 204, he said, we noticed that when racist whites see white people conducting themselves admirably in public, they see those blacks as extraordinary, meaning not like those ordinarily inferior black people. So that keeps that dyad of superior, inferior in place that we've been talking about. Yep. And this concept of uplift suasion, this ideology is deeply ingrained. And ultimately, he comes to this awareness that I am responsible for myself. I am responsible for my racist ideas. Others are not. In the flip side, I am responsible for the ways in which I choose to show up. And I cannot control how another person chooses to show up. But I can live and act in an anti-racist fashion or catch myself when I begin to slip. And that is an inner journey that I am on at all times. And perhaps I would dare to say, Rev Charles, in the act of showing up that way and acting that way, your action becomes almost like this ripple effect that can begin to transform the people around you. Whereas just I'm saying these things in a certain manner with the hope that it's going to change the way that you see me or others. I don't know. It's just kind of a variety of things that kind of pop up in my mind there.
Yeah. Well, I love that he talks about the history of where this uplift suasion and all that. That it's still based on a racist idea, that it was up to the white people to uplift, or bring along. There's just no dignity in the entire process. It's still a hierarchical issue.
Yeah, I think he says like this idea, even from early white abolitionists, this idea of they need our parental care or our guidance. And then even affluent African Americans at that time, that we need to help people who are just leaving slavery become morally just.
Yep.
Which means
it's from one system to the next system.
Right.
It's the same. It's one. Okay, you got slavery, and then now that slavery's gone, now that these people that are still beneath us need our help to come into being civilized. Exactly. It's just the whole thing's not based on any sort of integrity, which is wholeness.
Right.
Recognizing the wholeness of another. Yeah.
Right. So moving right along, then there were a lot of paragraphs in this, and I think we chatted at the beginning. It was a very academic, this chapter was. So there were a handful of paragraphs that I just want to touch upon. At the bottom of page 205, he kind of touches upon that moral and educational suasion focus on persuading white people, on appealing to their moral conscience through horror of their logical mind, through education. But what happens if racist ideas make people illogical?
Yeah.
What if persuading everyday white people is not persuading racist policymakers? What if racist policymakers know about the harmful outcome of their policies? What if racist policymakers have neither moral nor conscience, let alone moral conscience, to paraphrase Malcolm X?
Mm-hmm.
If no group of history has gained their freedom through appealing to the moral conscience of their oppressors? Asada Shakur. What if economic, political, or cultural self-interest drives racist policymakers, not hateful immortality, not ignorance?
Immorality.
Yep. Immortality.
Yep.
Immorality. And those are all incredible questions. And it leads into something that Abraham Lincoln said. If I could save the nation without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps save the Union. Right. And so in the midst of freeing slaves and Emancipation Proclamation, which we can see kind of where that stemmed from, saving the Union, we see that after that happened, things continued to revert back to the ways that it was prior.
Which goes back to the issue of cause versus symptom.
Yeah.
I'm cutting you off. I'm just excited.
No, it really
speaks
does.
to the same thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And hence the reason, and he goes through a variety of things that happened after that emancipation that maintained those patterns of racial hierarchy and actually didn't create an equal union, which was maybe the intent of the founders, or anyways.
It's the idea of it.
The idea of it. And so going right along with that,
but again, that comes back to this whole idea of ideology.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just a good idea. We can't base on something just on a great ideology.
Right.
It's got to be the ink. It's got to be the policy. It's got to be the system. It's got to be the law, not just a good idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and it's fascinating to kind of just look at the history and the way in which the Southern Reconstruction and in the way in which they ultimately said, okay, we got to stop trying to fight wars for the Negroes and implementing Jim Crow things and preventing them from voting, voter suppression, things of that sort. And W.E.B. Du Bois, he was mentioning really what needs to happen then, instead of just trying to persuade people not to be racist, instead focus on acquiring power, which then can lead towards possibly shifting those policies. And he mentions, or in the book there on page 207, he mentions all of the legislation that has been passed. We're talking about the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, a variety of things that have been passed throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s here in America. And ultimately saying that, did we ever think that racist power started civil rights legislation out of self-interest? And racist power stopped out of self-interest when enough African and Asian and Latin nations were inside of the American sphere of influence. Ultimately saying, what if these particular policies that were passed at that time were not necessarily for the idea that we thought, but there was a greater thought around why they were doing it, in order to appeal to African nations or Asian nations or Latin nations, to bring them into the sphere of American influence, to begin to capitalize off of those newly acquired systems that they're aiming to achieve, which is a fascinating concept.
Well, again, I'll come back to the book I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Please read that book. You know, it has everything to do with economy, but he puts, it's the same conversation, the same argument in terms of racist or racial ideas as the economic idea, and they're all they're conjoined twins, right? The conjoined twins.
Yeah.
There's something else I was going to say and I forgot. So it's a commentary on my forgetfulness.
He mentions on page 208 a little bit about Martin Luther King. And for everybody, I think that many may be aware, but towards the end of MLK Jr.'s life, he really started changing his tone and some of the things that he was saying. One of which, we've had it wrong and mixed up in our country. And this has led Negro Americans in the past to seek their goals through love and moral suasion devoid of power. And then ultimately saying problem of power, a confrontation between these forces of power demanding change, and the forces of power dedicated to preserving the status quo. And that leads to this particular portion in the middle of the page. The problem of race has always been at its core the problem of power, not the problem of immorality or ignorance. And so therefore, policymakers, particularly those that may benefit off of racist ideas and policies themselves, drum up fear of anti-racist policies through racist ideas, knowing that if the policies are implemented, it will basically begin to shift the way that people see the world around them. And that is another incredible realization, I would dare to say, that sometimes we're seeing, many times we're seeing the world through a very small peephole that we call our reality. And what lies beyond that is actually a transformation in mindset.
Lens of perception, I think they call it in sociological circles. The lens of perception.
The lens of and Adair actually said, to bring another lens into the discussion, I don't think you can speak of one example of police using taser instead of guns with a white dangerous man. And we have been made aware of numerous times when police have criminally overreacted with black men, but knowingly they act without fear of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they have killed white men too. It is very difficult not to begin thinking that every incident and everything is racial. This is dangerous because it is not true. How do you determine?
I don't know how to answer that question in this moment, but I do want to share something, a discussion I had recently with a friend who was a person of influence in the Washington state government.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know what? I'm actually not sure if I should speak on this without permission first. So
it's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to pass on it, but it's actually insightful. Not that I'm going to say who this person is, but I'm not sure that I should share the story. So
it makes sense. It makes sense. And I think to Adair's point, what I think the point that I was really trying to kind of bring to the forefront is this idea of, and it's talked about in this book, is this idea of being a criminal you're guilty until proven innocent, some individuals, and innocent until proven guilty for some individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can see at times, and it's not just this is this way, this is this way, but we can see it has been apparent time and time again how various people of power have responded or reacted to one group of people versus another group of people, or let's just say towards one person, towards another person.
Absolutely.
The various things. And I think that is something that we can all see. and from all different lenses of the spectrum. But for this one, obviously, I was just referring to the most recent thing that I saw.
Lovely. We probably have a number. We're halfway through the chapter. Do you have
I have only three more.
Okay, cool.
3 more. So an activist then, what is an activist? On page 209. And he says an activist produces power and policy change, not mental change. And that is something that I really want to think that I can work on. I have a lot of these ideas. I enjoy having these conversations, but really putting the boots on the ground and beginning to move towards an actual shift of policy that begins to create the results that I am hopefully aiming to achieve is something that I know personally I could dedicate myself towards.
Well, do you think that what about the idea that a mental shift and a policy shift can also be conjoined twins? I mean, you won't have a policy shift unless it's a mental shift somehow.
Yeah.
So those two can walk together. If I mean, someone who's been practicing, go through the definitions of the racist idea of things instead of the anti-racist idea of things, but at some point their mind has changed, and they're a person of influence, politician, charismatic, whatever the situation might be, that then they will affect a policy shift as well. I mean, there's got to be, they have to walk together.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's a cut and dry one side or the other. I also truly believe that any real lasting shift or transformation has to begin within the individual or individuals. Policy is a behavior of something that happens out there, but there has to be a true fundamental shift within. So I am totally with you with it. They kind of are both walking along the same path.
Yep. Yeah. So it's both, not either or, both and, as we keep moving forward. Both and. Yeah.
Yep.
But I think what the author's also highlighting, though, is that it can't be just a mental exercise. That's not enough. It's like with affirmative prayer. Treat, move your feet.
Right.
Pray, then perform. It's got to be both. That's how I bring it into principle.
Yeah. I totally agree. And this example that he has of this experience that happened in Louisiana is something that I didn't know of. Have you heard about this?
I didn't remember it as I was reading this. No.
So for those of you who have read the book, you may know. For those of you who haven't, I'll quickly share a little bit of what it is. So in 2006 in Louisiana, a day after Black students hung out under what they called on their campus the white tree, white students hung nooses from the branches. And the school superintendent only suspended the individuals who did this, the white perpetrators, as a prank. Which did nothing to curb the subsequent racial violence against Black students in the small town of Jena, Louisiana. On December 4th, 2006, 6 of them, young Black students, were arrested and charged with attempted murder for beating up a white student. One of them was tried as a juvenile, and the other 5 were tried as adults. And the district attorney, Reed Walters, said that when you are convicted, I will seek the maximum penalty allowed by law, which is up to 100 years in prison.
100 years. Yep.
And so this is what we're kind of talking about. So he had this idea at his Black student union at Temple that they were going to organize and have this big march and car caravan down to DC to begin to protest at that time President Bush's administration to begin to step in and take some type of action.
At the Supreme Court, right? They were going to go to the Supreme Court. I think is that right? Do I have that right?
Yeah. Yep. To basically say that they need to step in and do something. And he had this large idea, grandiose idea of basically putting yourself in harm's way and possibly being charged as a criminal themselves for doing these acts, which then prompted certain fear in some of the student body not wanting to necessarily do that. So those are on page 210.
Yep.
So he was saying these feelings began to pop up within him on page 210. And what if instead of feelings of advocacy, we had an outcome of advocacy
Yeah.
that put equitable outcomes before our guilt and anguish? What if we focused our human and fiscal resources on changing power and policy to actually make society, not just our feelings, better?
Yep.
And I thought
Love
that was a powerful, powerful point. Because so often, I know for myself, even in Atlanta, marching and doing these things, it makes you feel very empowered. But then, I go home and I sit in my comfortable house. I maybe click on the TV or grab my phone or turn on my computer, and I start thinking, is that actually leading to shift the cause of the effects that we're seeing, or was it just a well-intentioned march?
Yep. It's like the distinction between marching and then feeling good about it. I was part of that march. I saw myself on the news, rah, 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 sis, boom, bah, which is fine. But then go meet with your local legislator. Like ask for a meeting with your local law, your policymakers, that kind of thing, to actually make an argument, to have some influence, to rewrite laws and things like that. Like, what are we actually doing to actually create a substantive change?
Right.
And that was part of the wake up call. I mean, there's been plenty of times when I've sent out an email and, in opposition to whatever people are thinking and this and that. But yeah, I do that from the comfort of my own couch.
Right.
Or, join with a group and this is wrong or this is right, but haven't affected real change. The only change that's going to make a difference is when we look at policy and law.
Yeah.
And then the right enforcement of that.
And he mentions this idea of fear. And I thought that was, and he quoted Will Smith on that movie After Earth, where he said, fear is not real. It is a product of our imagination. Don't misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, we have to be courageous to be anti-racist on page 212. While many people are fearful of what could happen if they resist, I am fearful of what would happen if I don't resist. I am a fearful cowardice. Cowardice is the inability to amass strength to do what is right in the face of fear. And I thought that was it was a good point from
well,
me.
You know what it goes back to is Dr. King's sermon about Jesus and the road to Damascus, or the Good Samaritan. Whereas the people that came before the Good Samaritan said, well, what would happen if I go over there and try and help this guy? I might get shot or killed or manipulated or whatever. And then this other person comes along and says, well, what will happen if I don't go over there?
Yeah.
And I love that. That's the point. That's exactly what that evoked for me, is what happens if we don't do this?
Mm-hmm.
We keep tearing each other apart.
Yeah.
I love that point too.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a kind of a heavier message on the bottom of page 212 where he's beginning to talk about this when Theodore Roosevelt crossed the color line and dined with Booker T. Washington. And one of the U.S. senators said, the action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that nigger will necessitate our killing of 1,000 niggers in the South before they'll learn their place again.
Yep.
And that is this type of institutionalized conversation that we've been having over the course of 16 weeks now, is that it's something that's there but not always spoken about. And obviously it's morphed and transformed as things have evolved forward. But it does not mean that it's just simply gone or has disappeared.
Yep.
So that was something that he then...
Well, and also
Go ahead,
that last sentence in that paragraph says he was not joking.
He was not joking.
Like, this is literal. And then it goes on, maybe you're about to say this, but he actually went and
re-terrorized those people to teach them that they don't have power.
Yep.
And to remind them that they don't have power. And he did that when he was younger, before he was a senator. And he was a part of a mob that murdered black militiamen for defending black power in a black town in South Carolina.
Yep.
And violently snatched back control of that area so white supremacists could begin to flourish again in that area, and wore that as a badge of honor when they literally lynched people at the governorship. He lynched himself into the governorship by way of showing that type of terror, literal terror. And he went back to that same area to reinvigorate that racial terrorism that he was known for having in that area, and to continue to suppress or hold down or make them feel as if they don't have any power to actually affect policy change. Which then, if we take it back to this uplift suasion type of conversation, it didn't matter how many people in that community of the Black individuals acted morally, demonstrated that they were educated, were contributing citizens to that society. That did not matter, and that was not going to make a difference in the mind of this individual.
How could it? It couldn't. Yeah.
It's a fascinating conversation, to say the least. So on page 213, he has a handful of things at the bottom of page 213. I would just encourage you, if you have the book, maybe to read that, because there is a very long paragraph that I'm not going to stumble through here, but I think that is something that's extremely important and ultimately leads to this idea: self-critique allows for change. When we begin to recognize maybe some of the areas that we've fallen short, where we recognize areas where maybe we could stand up a little bit stronger, self-critiquing, introspection, meditation, being in that contemplative space internally to begin to recognize where we can grow, that really opens up this doorway of not only flexibility, but moving forward and being more perhaps empowered as we move forward in the future.
Amen.
So a few questions that he has at the bottom, and then I have a few takeaways that we can carry with us. If anybody else has any insights that they would like to share in the comments, please, again, feel free to do so. So he asks on the bottom of page 214, what if we assessed the methods of leaders and organizations by their results of policy change and equity?
Yep. Results.
Results.
Keyword. Yep.
Results. What if strategies and policy solutions stemmed not from ideologies, but from problems? What if anti-racists were propelled only by the craving for power to shape policy in their equitable interests? And then the most effective demonstrations are obviously those that allow individuals to recognize that they have this anti-racist power within, and also begin to shift people to recognize how they can actually begin to impact policy going forward. Organizing and protesting are much harder and more impactful than mobilizing and demonstrating. Seizing power is much harder than protesting power and demonstrating its excess. That is something that I just wanted to share there. Any thoughts?
Yeah, just the whole idea of power. He says, what's that first? He says the 215, where was it? Oh, the most effective demonstrations help people find the anti-racist power within. And that's what we know. And the author speaks about this through the book. He talks about the individual rather than the group as well.
Right.
That our power, we have to activate the power within us. And once we're activated in the power within us, we realize that we actually can get a meeting with our local legislators. That we actually can ask for an audience with, whoever it might be, or demand one. Go through the process, whatever it might be, with your mayor or local policymakers. That you can put a phone call in. That you can do these things, but we have to realize first that we actually have the power within us, and that's that activation piece. So again, Jeffon, I go back to that whole idea of, I'll call the second, aspect of conjoined twins, the mental aspect of things, and then the demonstration aspect of things.
Yeah. Or
the action aspect of things. But we have to realize that we actually, and this is part of the hypnotism, the mesmerism that's been happening for hundreds and thousands of years, is that one race or one people have power over another. And then so we just don't even, I mean, I think about my own life, like the ways that I've been bullied by whoever I've been bullied by, that I don't have any power to do anything about this situation. And the key to freedom to start with is realizing that I actually do have power. There is something I can do. And from that realization of power, then comes action.
Definitely. Definitely.
What is the science of mind? What was the question, Adair? Do you remember the question, Jeffon?
Yeah, I'll say it. It says, I'm sure they have killed white men too. It is very difficult not to begin thinking that every incident and everything is racial. This is dangerous because it is not true. How do you determine?
I think it's a question of power as well. Leverage. Because, I mean, white people, black people, I mean, in outside of justice, people have been done wrong in so many different ways, whatever your color is. And sometimes people live in the ignorance and in the nightmare that they have power over another, and they can exercise that. So the idea is to realize, I think it comes back to, I don't know how this lands, but the idea that in the principles of science of mind, there is one thing happening, and that is life, and we need to wake up to that. And within life is equity, and we have to wake up from the nightmare of separation. We have to wake up the nightmare of that Jeffon is not my brother, that Jeffon is not that we share blood as a human family, not an otherness. And to tend to our brothers and tend to our sisters. And we need to keep waking up.
Definitely. And I would say, I would agree. Everything is not racial. Every incident is not racial. And be willing to look at the effects that we are seeing. This is what I've been doing, to look at. Oh, I guess the question is who or what is responsible?
Oh, well, yeah.
And I'll share this. To be willing to look at the suffering that fellow brothers and sisters on this planet are facing and not discount or diminish it. To be willing to take it a step further. And this may be my background of accounting and analytic type stuff, and seeing the statistics that continuously show that there is a disproportionate impact on certain groups of people over other certain groups of people.
Data.
Yep. And not simply dismiss that, at least for me. And be willing then to find ways that I can continue to forge ahead in the role that I have in this life, in this vessel that I have the blessing to move and exist and experience this realm of reality with. How can I begin to dissolve the barriers, first and foremost within my mind, that perpetuate that vision of separation? And then secondly, how can I build bridges with those who I otherwise would have avoided, ignored, or simply acted as if they were not important? And that is something that I have to do inside of myself. And the question around the accountability of who and what is responsible, I don't know if I fully.
Well, I'll speak to it.
Yeah.
I am. When I go into any situation, when I go into a room, a restaurant, whatever setting might be, I'm accountable. The answer always has to come back to I am. And I know there's injustices that take place, but I, as Charles Hall, have the capacity to influence the room that I'm in through constantly self-learning and being exposed to new ideas, being uncomfortable, growing, changing. Ultimately, who's responsible for anything is me. And if we wait for someone else to be responsible, then we're going to be waiting a long time. But I think to educate ourselves, to be exposed to new ideas, to desire to grow, to see when an injustice is happening, and to speak up, to do something about it. I'm talking about me, Charles Hall. I'm responsible.
Yeah.
So that's my answer. That's the simplest answer I can think of for anything, for my lot in life, for my experience of it. And as Charles Hall, not speaking on behalf of the human race, but when I see an injustice, when I see inequity, I am called to be responsible to do something about it. That's it.
And I want to mention to Adair, I appreciate your comments there, and I do want to kind of apologize from my end if sometimes it's hard to read between the lines of what is being asked specifically. So I'm trying to, if by means I missed the mark, so to say, just I'm trying to decipher exactly the question itself. And
we're fine. We're fine. We're working it out.
Yeah. She said, science of mind, I believe, suggests we are all responsible as we are all human beings on this planet at the same time. And that is.
But to think of it in Adair, I would say to think of it in all can still be a little out there, as opposed to think of I am responsible. I'm responsible. Are we all? Ultimately, at the end of the day, but that's still, I can put it downstream a little bit, thinking about, oh, we all are. Where I'm most empowered is saying I am.
You know what's a fascinating thing that one of my mentors has said is, sit with this idea that I am 100% responsible for everything that it impacts me. I'm 100% responsible for everything that is happening in the world. And then see the tension or the stress or the anxiety or the thoughts that surface around that, and then sit with that a little bit longer. And get to a place where you can say, I'm 100% responsible for the outcome of my life. And I'm 100% responsible for everything that I see out there in the world to some varying degree. Maybe not doing everything, but we are all impacting the co-creation of this planet simultaneously.
Well, and it's still our lens of perception. It's how we perceive it. And I'm responsible for that. I can see an opportunity, or I can see an opportunity. I can see an opportunity for growth and change, or I can see an opportunity to be a victim.
I am not. I am 25% responsible. No. Yeah,
we're not going to hang out very much then, Jeffon. I'm going to tell you.
No, it's really fascinating because I have a resiliency program that I've been doing with organizations and also an engagement one that really highlights this concept of 100% responsibility. And to hear the pushback at times when people say, well, I'm 50%. And then you say, okay, so if two people entered in to get hired at your position and one came in and said, look, I'm 85% responsible. And then one said, look, I'm 50% responsible. I mean, many things fall outside of my realm of control. What person organization? And usually that begins to make them say, okay, well, maybe not. But okay, enough with that. I have a few takeaways that I would like to share.
Takeaways.
These are, I am responsible, but looking to speak without forging further separation. Adair mentioned.
Amen.
So a few takeaways that I have.
Thanks for participating so much, Adair. We appreciate your participation. Let's everybody get on Adair's level of participation. We love that. We love it. Amen. All right, takeaways.
Yeah. Thank you, Adair. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen here, and so first and foremost, reflect each day on the ways that you've contributed to creating. Oh, that was supposed to be an equal and equitable world. So how have you created an equal and equitable world? Right where you are, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your organization. Be attentive of the thoughts you think that exclude or put people or yourself in an inferior light. Feel thoughts that honor the divine within all. We are the thinkers of our experience, which means we can be mindful and conscious of those thoughts that we are choosing to empower. We may not be able to fully control the 60,000 that pop into our mind, but we can take conscious control, or at least awareness, of the ones that we are going to choose to empower. Meditate and reflect on the most challenging concepts from this chapter. That's from last week as well. Ask yourself each night, what ways did I act anti-racist and what ways did I not? And then the most important one that I'm going to be really focusing on this week is cherish this moment. We all know that this is a blink of a physical life. There are people around us who we have the opportunity to interact with. So cherish this moment and honor your light. to the degree that we honor our light within is the degree, it seems, to which we then honor the light that is shining with all. And so that is something that I'm really going to commit to as we move throughout this week, is that final portion there.
Awesome. Love it. Your takeaways, Jeffon, each week. That's a great stuff for us to be able to focus on and sink our teeth into and practice. And folks, just so you know, you can always go back. You know, we record these shows. You find them on YouTube, Facebook. If you need a reminder on Jeffon's takeaways, we got to come up with a cool segment for that, like some animation or something. What a name, Jeffon's takeaway, something that's catchy and flashy. I love it. You can always go back and reflect on those. Jeffon, thank you for another wonderful Tuesday, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the material you prepare, it's wonderful how you summarize things and bring us the slides. I'm very grateful for that.
Thanks.
I want to thank Reverend Lori Savage for producing the show today. We appreciate you, Lori. And we always continue to appreciate all the ways that you financially support Center for Spiritual Living Palm Desert. There's your text in supporting our community, 760-292-2233. Makes it very easy.
Rev Charles, you're bouncing in and out of connectivity. While we get Rev Charles back, as he was mentioning, you can support the center by simply going to cslpalmdesert.org, or you can text your support using the following number, 760-292-2233. CSL Palm Desert is such an incredible community. Having these type of conversations that I've been able to participate in, every time that I've been a part of CSL Palm Desert, it's just such a welcoming and loving community. So this is definitely a place that we can support in many ways. And financially is just one of the ways that we can continue to feed into this incredible community.
I love it. I think we were presenting at the same time. I couldn't see you anymore, though.
I couldn't see you either, so I just started going.
That's what I was doing. Hopefully somebody got something. Okay, either text your support, go to the website. We've got another great week lined up of things. Thanks for championing our community, Jeffon. That was funny. Thank you so much for your support of our center. We appreciate you. Jeffon, have a beautiful week, my friend.
Thank you.
Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert, much peace, much love. Make it the best day ever.